There is a moment in an empath's healing when people begin to say, "You have changed." And what they really mean is, "You no longer let me reach you in the same old way." They may call you cold because you do not rush to save them anymore. They may call you distant because you no longer explain every feeling until you're exhausted. They may say you are not the same empath anymore because the version of you they knew was easier to drain, easier to guilt, easier to access, and easier to keep emotionally responsible for everyone but herself. But healing does not turn an empath into someone heartless. It turns them into someone honest. And the truth is, you were never meant to be a sponge for everyone's pain. You're meant to become a person who can feel deeply without losing themselves in what they feel. That is the part people misunderstand. They think an empath is only an empath if she absorbs everything, forgives everything, notices everything, and remains endlessly available. They think empathy means being soft without limits. They think compassion means giving access to people who have repeatedly shown they cannot handle your heart carefully. But an empath who heals begins to understand something painful and freeing. Feeling everything does not mean carrying everything. And once that lesson enters your body, you do not become cold. You become clear. You begin to notice the difference between love and emotional labor. You begin to notice when kindness is being used as a doorway. You begin to notice when your guilt is being activated, not because you did something wrong, but because someone is uncomfortable with your boundary. You begin to notice that some people did not love your empathy. They loved your lack of protection around it. That realization changes you, not into a cruel person, not into a person who stops caring, but into someone who can care without collapsing, someone who can understand without excusing, someone who can listen without becoming responsible for what another adult refuses to heal. This is what a healed empath becomes, not numb, not bitter, not unreachable in the way people imagine. A healed empath becomes discerning. Discernment is different from coldness. Coldness says, "I do not care what happens to you." Discernment says, "I care, but I will not abandon myself to prove it." Coldness shuts the heart down. Discernment gives the heart a door, a lock, and the wisdom to know who has earned a key. For a long time, you may not have known how to do that. You may have treated every person's pain as your assignment. You may have felt guilty when someone was disappointed, even if their disappointment came from you finally choosing yourself. You may have said yes when your body was quietly begging for rest. You may have answered messages that felt like demands because silence felt too cruel. And people got used to that version of you. The friend who called only when her life was falling apart got used to your midnight emotional availability. The family member who mocked your sensitivity got used to you laughing it off so the room could stay comfortable. The coworker who leaned on your insight got used to you doing invisible emotional labor without being acknowledged. The partner who wanted your warmth but not your boundaries got used to receiving the softest parts of you without learning how to protect them. So when you heal, it feels like a disturbance to people who benefited from your wound. You no longer answer from panic. You no longer make yourself smaller so others do not feel exposed. You no longer turn every cold tone into a personal emergency. You no longer confuse being needed with being loved. That is when they say you are not an empath anymore. But maybe you are becoming one for the first time in a way that includes you, because the wounded empath often excludes herself from her own compassion. She gives others the benefit of the doubt, but questions her own pain. She understands everyone's trauma, but dismisses her own exhaustion. She senses everybody's needs, but treats her own needs like interruptions. The healed empath does not stop being compassionate. She simply includes herself in the circle of care. That is the shift. Imagine a woman at a family dinner. Years ago, a sharp comment would have made her laugh nervously, explain herself, or spend the rest of the night wondering how to win back warmth. Now, when someone says you are too sensitive, she does not perform innocence. She does not start a speech. She does not collapse into shame. She hears it, feels the sting, and quietly decides, "I do not have to shrink for this room to feel safe." That is not coldness. That is self-possession. Imagine her at work. A coworker dumps emotional frustration on her every afternoon, not because they are close, but because she feels easy to unload on. In the past, she would have stayed late, listened, nodded, absorbed the heaviness, then gone home drained. Now she says kindly, "I hope that gets easier, but I have to get back to my work." No apology essay, no guilt performance, no emotional overpayment. That is not coldness. That is stewardship of energy. Imagine her in a friendship. Someone sends a message full of chaos, expecting immediate comfort. The old version of her would respond instantly, even if she was exhausted, because she believed love meant being available at all times. The healed version pauses. She asks herself, "Do I have capacity right now, Or am I about to betray my own body to keep someone else from feeling alone? That pause is not selfish. That pause is maturity. The healed empath learns a sacred pause. Before saying yes, she pauses. Before explaining, she pauses. Before rescuing, she pauses. Before absorbing another person's mood, she pauses. The pause becomes the space where old programming loses power because many empaths did not become overgivers by accident. They were trained. Somewhere in life, they learned that love was earned by being easy. Easy to talk to, easy to depend on, easy to forgive, easy to interrupt, easy to need, easy to return to after causing pain. They learned to read the room before they learned to read themselves. They learned to be useful before they learned to be known. They learned to calm others before anyone taught them how to calm their own body. So when healing begins, it may feel unnatural. It may feel wrong to choose peace. It may feel cruel to not respond immediately. It may feel selfish to let someone sit with the consequence of their own behavior. It may feel strange to not chase an explanation from someone who misunderstood you, but discomfort does not always mean you are doing something wrong. Sometimes discomfort is what it feels like when an old survival pattern loses control. The healed empath begins to understand her nervous system. She starts noticing the physical signs, the tight chest before saying yes, the stomach drop when a certain name appears on the phone, the tired heaviness after a conversation that looked normal on the outside, the sudden need to sleep after being around someone who takes more than they give. She stops calling these signals dramatic. She starts calling them information. This is another thing a healed empath becomes: embodied. The wounded empath often lives in other people. She lives in their moods, their interpretations, their needs, their reactions. She tries to predict, prevent, soothe, and repair. Her attention is always outside herself, scanning for danger or disappointment. The healed empath begins coming back into her own body. She asks, "What do I feel?" before asking, "What do they need?" She asks, "Is this safe for me?" before asking, "Will they be upset?" She asks, "Do I actually want to do this?" before saying yes out of habit. That is not a loss of empathy. That is empathy becoming whole, because empathy without embodiment becomes self-abandonment. You feel everyone else, but disappear from yourself. You understand everyone else, but cannot hear your own no. You comfort everyone else, but do not know how to sit beside your own pain without rushing away from it. A healed empath becomes the kind of person who can say, "I feel you, but I also feel me." That one sentence changes everything. In romantic relationships, this can feel like a completely new life. The old empath may have been drawn to intensity. The unavailable person, the wounded person who needed saving. The person who gave just enough affection to keep hope alive, then withdrew enough to trigger panic. The person whose pain felt like a mission. But the healed empath begins to lose interest in emotional puzzles. She no longer confuses anxiety with chemistry. She no longer mistakes inconsistency for depth. She no longer believes she has to prove her love by surviving someone's confusion. She starts wanting something quieter and harder for the wounded self to accept. Consistency. At first, consistency may feel boring because chaos once felt familiar. A calm person may not activate the old nervous system in the same way. A respectful person may not create the same urgency. A safe connection may not feel like a storm. But after healing, the empath begins to realize that peace is not the absence of passion. Peace is the presence of safety, and safety is not weakness. Safety is where the nervous system finally stops begging for proof. In social media life, the healed empath changes too. She does not post to be validated by people who barely know her. She does not measure her worth by who watches silently. She does not share every wound for public sympathy. She becomes more intentional, not hidden from fear but private from wisdom. She understands that not every eye deserves access to what is still tender. Not every person watching is celebrating. Not every reaction is nourishment. So she shares from fullness, not hunger. She speaks when there is truth, not when she needs someone to tell her she matters. That is not coldness. That is self-trust. In community spaces, she changes too. Maybe she used to be the woman everyone leaned on, the one who noticed who was lonely, the one who remembered birthdays, checked on everyone, held the emotional atmosphere together. But slowly she realized she was becoming invisible inside her usefulness. Now she still cares, but she does not become the unpaid emotional structure of every room. She can notice someone's sadness without becoming responsible for fixing it. She can offer kindness without silently signing a contract to carry everything. That is what healing does. It changes the shape of your compassion. Wounded compassion says, "I will carry this because I feel it." Healed compassion says, "I can honor what I feel without carrying what is not mine." Wounded compassion says, "If I do not help, I am bad." Healed compassion says, "If I help from depletion, I am abandoning myself." Wounded compassion says, "I need them to understand me." Healed compassion says, I can be honest even if they choose not to understand. This is the transformation people misread. They call it cold because they no longer receive the same unchecked access. They call it pride because guilt no longer works the same way. They call it distance because you are no longer emotionally leaning toward people who make you feel unsafe. But what they are witnessing is not the death of your empathy. It is the birth of your discernment. There is a deeper identity shift here. A healed empath stops defining herself by how much she can endure. She no longer finds worth in being the one who stays the longest, forgives the most, understands the deepest, and complains the least. She begins to ask, who am I when I am not rescuing? Who am I when I am not absorbing? Who am I when I am not proving I am good by giving more than I have? Those questions can feel terrifying. Because if your identity was built around being needed, then not being needed can feel like emptiness. If your value came from being useful, rest can feel like guilt. If love meant emotional labor, peace can feel like abandonment. But this emptiness is not the end. It is space where your real self can finally appear. Maybe the real self is quieter than the survival self. Maybe she likes slow mornings. Maybe she enjoys art, walking, reading, prayer, music, cooking, or being outside without anyone needing anything from her. Maybe she has opinions she never shared because she was too busy being agreeable. Maybe she has dreams she never followed because her energy was always tied up in other people's emergencies. Healing returns energy to the person who kept giving it away, and that return can feel almost unfamiliar. You may not know what to do with energy that is not being spent on worry, repair, guilt, or monitoring. You may feel restless in peace. You may feel strange when no one is pulling on you. You may even miss the chaos because chaos gave you a role. This is where the healed empath has to be gentle with herself. Do not run back to the old pattern just because peace feels unfamiliar. Do not mistake calm for emptiness. Do not confuse the absence of drama with the absence of love. Your nervous system may need time to learn that safety can be real without becoming boring and quiet can be full without being lonely. Here is the action step. For the next 7 days, before you give emotional energy to anyone, ask yourself 3 questions. Is this mine to carry? Do I have the capacity to respond without betraying myself? Am I choosing this from love or from fear of being seen as unkind? If the answer is clear love and you have capacity, give from a clean place. If the answer is fear, guilt, panic, or obligation, pause. You do not have to punish the person. You do not have to disappear. You simply have to stop confusing urgency with truth. Write those 3 questions somewhere visible. Put them in your notes app. Place them near your bed. Let them become a doorway back to yourself. Because the old empathic pattern moves fast. It rushes to reply, rushes to soothe, rushes to explain, rushes to rescue, rushes to make sure no one feels abandoned. While abandoning the self in the process, healing slows the pattern down. And in that slowness, you become someone new, not a cold person. A selective person, not a hard person. A protected person, not a selfish person. A self-included person, not someone who stops feeling. Someone who stops drowning. This is why the thumbnail says, you're not an empath anymore. This is what you become. The deeper truth is, you may not be the kind of empath people were used to. You are no longer the empath without a gate. You are no longer the empath who confuses pain with purpose. You are no longer the empath who lets every wound become a responsibility. You become a witness. A witness can see pain without becoming owned by it. A witness can hear sadness without turning it into a personal assignment. A witness can sense dishonesty without entering a battle to prove it. A witness can love someone and still let them face the consequences of their own choices. This is a sacred transformation because for many empaths, witnessing feels less loving than rescuing. It can feel passive. It can feel distant. It can feel like you are doing nothing. But sometimes doing nothing is exactly what allows another person to meet themselves. When you rush to rescue everyone, you may unintentionally keep them from feeling the weight of their own behavior. When you soften every consequence, they do not learn. When you absorb every emotional storm, they do not have to develop their own regulation. A healed empath learns that love is not always rescue. Sometimes love is refusing to interrupt the lesson that belongs to someone else. That is not cruelty. That is respect for both souls. You respect them enough to let them be responsible for themselves. You respect yourself enough to stop becoming the bridge between them and their own accountability. This change may create distance in some relationships, not because you are punishing anyone, but because some relationships were built on your overfunctioning. When you stop overfunctioning, the structure shakes. People have to adjust, contribute, reflect, or drift. Let the truth reveal the relationship. In friendship, the healed empath stops being the only one who reaches out. She watches whether care becomes mutual when she is no longer carrying the entire connection. She does not test from bitterness. She observes from self-respect. In family, she stops trying to be understood by people who only listen when she is playing her assigned role. She can love them, visit them, speak kindly, and still keep parts of herself private. At work, she stops taking responsibility for every emotional undercurrent. She can be kind without being the therapist of the office. She can contribute without being available for every event session. She can be respected without being constantly accessible. In love, she stops accepting intensity without consistency. She stops making excuses for the person who is tender only after hurting her. She stops translating mixed signals into romance. She chooses a love that does not require her nervous system to stay on alert. These are not small changes. These are identity changes. And identity changes can make people uncomfortable. Some people will miss the version of you that had no filter. They will miss the version that always had time. They will miss the version that believed every explanation deserved another chance. They will miss the version that took their coldness as a challenge to become warmer. But your healing is not a betrayal of them. It is a return to yourself. You are allowed to become less available to what made you sick. You are allowed to become less interested in emotional chaos. You are allowed to become harder to manipulate through guilt. You are allowed to become calmer in the face of other people's reactions. You are allowed to become someone whose empathy has boundaries, standards, and self-respect. This does not make you less spiritual. It makes your spirituality embodied. It brings compassion down from an idea into a practice that includes your body, your time, your energy, your limits, and your peace. A healed empath becomes a guardian of their inner world, not a guard who attacks everyone. A guardian who understands that the inner world is sacred. The healed empath knows that what enters the heart shapes the mind, the body, the sleep, the nervous system, the choices, the future. So she becomes careful with what she lets live inside her. She stops replaying conversations that steal her peace. She stops reading into every silence. She stops letting people rent space in her mind after they have proven they cannot respect space in her life. She stops feeding thoughts that make her feel responsible for adults who refuse to be responsible for themselves. This is mental hygiene, and many empaths need mental hygiene as much as emotional healing, because the world can be loud, people can be demanding, pain can be contagious. And if you have spent years absorbing, your mind may continue conversations long after they ended. Healing means learning to close the door internally, not just externally. You can say that is not mine to keep. You can say I release what does not belong to me. You can say I can care without caring. You can say I can be kind without becoming available for confusion. These are not empty affirmations if you practice them with your choices. Every time you do not answer from panic, you teach your body a new truth. Every time you rest without earning it, you teach your body a new truth. Every time you let someone be disappointed without betraying yourself, you teach your body a new truth. Every time you choose safe connection over intense chaos, you teach your body a new truth. Little by little, you become less reactive and more rooted. Rooted is the word. A healed empath becomes rooted. Rooted in truth. Rooted in the body. Rooted in values. Rooted in the ability to care without collapsing. Rooted in the ability to say no without becoming harsh. Rooted in the ability to love without turning love into self-erasure. And rooted people are not easily moved by guilt, flattery, chaos, or emotional performance. They can listen deeply, but they do not surrender their center. They can forgive, but they do not automatically reopen the door. They can feel compassion, but they do not let compassion become a weapon used against them. This is what people are sensing when they say you feel different. They are sensing that the old doorway has changed. You are still warm, but not wide open. You are still sensitive, but not unprotected. You are still loving, but not endlessly available. You are still an empath, but no longer an emotional sponge. You have become a filter. A sponge absorbs everything. A filter lets through what is clean enough to enter and holds back what would contaminate the inner life. A sponge becomes heavy with what it absorbs. A filter protects the flow. That is what you become, a filter, a witness, a guardian, a rooted presence, a woman whose heart is still alive, but no longer abandoned at the door of every wounded person who asks for access. And maybe this is the most beautiful part. Healed empathy becomes more powerful, not less. Because when you are no longer exhausted by carrying what is not yours, your compassion becomes cleaner. You are not giving from panic. You are not helping to earn love. You are not listening because you fear rejection. You are not forgiving because guilt is controlling you. You are choosing. Chosen compassion is stronger than compulsive compassion. Chosen kindness is stronger than fear-based kindness. Chosen love is stronger than survival love. This is what people may not understand. The healed empath's love becomes rare, but more real. Their presence becomes quieter but more stable. Their care becomes more selective but more honest. They no longer give to everyone, but when they give, it comes from truth. That is the empath after healing, not cold clear, not bitter, boundaried, not empty-rooted, not unreachable selective, not less loving. Finally included in her own love. And if this is where you are, do not let people shame you for the version of you that no longer bleeds on command. Do not let them convince you that your healing is cruelty because your old self was easier for them. Do not mistake their discomfort for your failure. Some people only recognize empathy when it is serving them. They do not recognize the healed version because the healed version does not come with unlimited access. Let them misunderstand what they benefited from. You do not need to prove you are still good. You need to live in a way that no longer requires self-betrayal to be seen as good. That is freedom, and in the next video, you will understand why people often call an empath cold right before they realize they no longer have access to the version of her they could drain. Because healed empathy does not disappear. It finally learns where it belongs.